And I think the same is true for Texas, but in our case, I don't think that you can tell whether, we believe that you can apply this law constitutionally, and we went to the trouble of creating numerous posters to illustrate that point. And we believe that in every one of those cases that our law would be applied constitutionally, and I'm happy to take questions. Governor, do you want to make a comment before we open it up?
Yeah, all I would say is that, after spending this much time in a courtroom debating foundational documents of law, okay, and the fact that our country is based upon Judeo-Christian principles, I think that Americans are just tired of the hypocrisy, right? I just think it is high time that we say, listen, we embrace what tradition and heritage is in this country, and I agree with the Attorney General. I like our chances.
Questions?
There was a lot of discussion in the meeting about whether this was passive or coercive, having the Ten Commandments posted. What's your thought on that, and some of the arguments that happened?
So, the question of coercion comes up as a legal question about how coercion plays out in the Supreme Court precedent. So, it's a very specific question, and it has specific consequences, I think, in the case. Our whole point is this is a passive display. The argument they're trying to make is that it is, in fact, coercive. We don't think that it is. We also think that coercion in the context of Supreme Court precedent has a very specific meaning, and this is not it.
And whatever the outcome, you do expect this to go to the Supreme Court, correct?
I'm sure that if we are successful here at the Fifth Circuit, that they will file a cert petition in the United States Supreme Court. Now, what the United States Supreme Court will do with that is anybody's guess.
I'd like to make a comment about that. It's interesting. When Liz and I went to school, we always hoped that our moms might, certainly I did, would put a quarter or a dime or give us a little money to maybe get a snack after school. What's amazing to me is on those coins, on our currency, is in God we trust. And yet we would put that inside, we would put that inside of our pockets on a consistent basis. So we spent more time with money in our pockets than we spent in school, right? And yet I don't understand, again, why we are here, why we can't just embrace the historical and traditional concepts of the Judeo-Christian principles that this nation was founded upon.
And to that point, there was a lot of discussion about examples that came from the bench about other documents that invoke God, invoke religion, invoke our traditional principles upon which this country is founded, religious principles upon which this country was founded. The point that we are trying to make is that this is a foundational document for our legal and our historical traditions. In creating our government structures, creating our country, the beliefs upon which it was founded are embodied in these documents, and they are illustrated in places as vaunted as the frieze in the United States Supreme Court, among others. And we illustrate that through those posters that we created, including quotations from Justice Ginsburg in her own book. Which, interestingly, were dismissed as the musings of just an 8th grader. Well, she wasn't just any 8th grader. She was an 8th grader who became a Supreme Court justice who never repudiated that particular statement. In fact, she put it in her book. So, I think that's one of the reasons we selected it, to illustrate how this is not only foundational, but it is instructional as a document for our children to learn, is part of our historical foundation.
Can you both say, CBS News, question for you. If this case does go to the Supreme Court, you have a significant weight in setting a new precedent in terms of, changing separation of church and state foundations that this country was founded on. How do you hope that this state law may change, precedent for other states around the country?
So, two things. One, we think it fits squarely within Supreme Court precedent. At the end of the day, our law, we believe that we've illustrated how it does that by creating posters that illustrate that. And so I don't think that it really does change anything. I think that we should be able to allow these this document to be posted in the historical context that we've created it. There's a larger question in play here about how and when you should be able to challenge state laws and what the burden of proof is for somebody to carry to take down a state law. And that's a lot of what we were talking about in there, is that this is premature. So, you know, I think that will play out in this case too quite a bit.
What would you say to parents who say that these commandments, this specific version of them is not their family's religion, is not what they would teach their children, and it goes against their right to control their children's upbringing?
It's not establishing a particular religion. It's not establishing a particular selection. It's not establishing anything. It is presenting an ideal of the foundational document of one of the foundational lawgivers that is part of our historical tradition. So, and it does that in a historical context in all of the posters that we've created. So, you know, I think that it is not coercive in that sense. It is posted on a wall. Nobody, and I think Judge Duncan pointed that out in one of the distinctions that he made regarding one of the cases, where the requirement was for a teacher to direct and state something in particular to a student who expressed a particular opinion that was contrary to the opinion that was in the books. And nobody's directed any teachers to say or do anything in this context, which I think is important.
I would advise parents like that they find some moral code. You either read the Ten Commandments or your child is going to learn the criminal code.
Do you think any other states will follow through if you guys do when moving forward?
Well, Texas did, so, you know, that's why they're here with us, because they did. And you know, I think that yes, maybe some other states would, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing.
Do you see any limits on what could be in a classroom? You know, whether that was part of the discussion, could there be certain prayers or certain Bible required readings? Is there any limit?
Sure, there's limits, and the Supreme Court's delineated those limits, and so I think that's part of the discussion that we had today, is where those limits exist now inside the boundaries that have already been established by the Supreme Court. So yes, there are limits. We think we're inside the limits.
And I have an on-topic question.